That was up for a second.
We are up. Welcome to Live at the Hive.
Oh, wait.
Oh, wait. No, I thought because
That
you had
flashed
that
for
up.
a second, and now it's back to the countdown.
Yeah, just for a second.
Now we're on.
Now we're
All
on.
right. Now we're on.
There we go. So welcome to Live at the Hive, everybody, for episode 18.
Welcome.
Welcome.
So today we had, today is a big day for the stream. We put up the banners.
Beautiful.
There we go. Yeah, we thought we would also welcome Justin, our creative director, to his first ever Live at the Hive.
Hello.
There you go. And yeah, we've actually got this week, the big kind of news is two things. One, we're streaming to 6 different channels concurrently right now, and I think it seems to be working nicely. We had a couple of glitches. That's why we were a couple of minutes late there.
But you should be able to tune in now on Twitter, YouTube,
Facebook,
of course.
Twitter,
as per
YouTube,
usual.
Facebook, yeah.
All the things.
Yeah.
All of the things. So this is the first. This was always the intention that we had. But when you start to stream to multiple locations, it gets infinitely more complex. And Facebook shut down their ability to do it natively. So there is a workaround, which we are doing. Sorry, Facebook. But yes, we are now live. And so today...
What's working today? What's been working for us this week?
Yep.
Is like we're gonna dive right in. Like Dan said, it's been a really great week. A lot of great great campaigns were launched this week. A lot of great work's gone into, particularly email automation and email programs in particular is one of the things we wanted to touch on. We kind of briefly discussed it last week when we were discussing remarketing and multiple touch points and how to continue talking to your audience at multiple times during their day and during your sales cycle. And email marketing is one of the best ways to do that. Particularly, we've been doing some webinar support programs for many of our clients, and that's a very typical instance in which you'll use email automation to support the program. But it basically just allows you to do some of the most basic things in marketing that are essential, and that's customization, so that you're not sending the exact same email message to your entire list every single time. And it also helps to speak to people at different levels of intent. So if you've sent, for example, a webinar invite to people to a list of, say, 10,000, and 6,000 of those people didn't even open the email, you don't really want to continue speaking to those people in the same way you would to those who registered or opened and looked at it, things like that. So
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So part of this today, what we're going to do is also something super fancy, which should work well. So yes, we do a lot of webinar marketing and promo, a lot of e-commerce as well. And I think the same rules always apply, which is target, segment, and resend. Because quite often what we will see is one email going out and then maybe one reminder and then one thank you. And really what happens from a marketing perspective is a lot is being left on the table, and you're not learning more about the leads that you've got, and you're only delivering one message, which may or may not apply. So it is development of a funnel, and in this particular case, this is what we would call a basic funnel, although some people might disagree when we have a look at this. So this is kind of cool.
this is a tool that we love to use called Lucidchart.
Yep.
If you do any sort of funnel development, website development, even any sort of marketing strategy work, this is an amazing tool. Drag and drop, very simple, and very great for client communications as well, because obviously it's very easy to kind of visually see the funnel and the strategy as opposed to having a lot of jargon and things like that thrown at you.
Yeah.
So
yeah, so now you can, what we've got up on the screen here, and now we can just, you're not visible, so it's all audio right now. So
no idea what we're
kinda
doing
fancy.
now.
Yeah. This is new, right? Were you expecting this? No?
yeah, we
you
talked
were
about it.
expecting
We
this.
bandied it about.
It's a little surprise.
So here what we have is a typical funnel that we would develop out of a for clients and for a program. This one is a webinar promotions email marketing funnel, and there's a couple of interesting things that happen over here. The first thing is up in the top right, the number 1 point, you'll see the intro offer. So that would be your first message with your primary call to action. Obviously, in this case, it's going to be a registration.
Yeah, and while we are using this as a webinar example, it can be applied to, your intro offer could be, perhaps a discount on, an item that you have as well, or, an event that you're hosting that's a live event, kind of insert CTA here, your call to action.
Yeah, absolutely. This works for webinars, training programs, it works for e-commerce. And what it really does is it allows you to do a couple of things that are really important in 2018. One is to reinforce using custom audiences or remarketing groups, depending on the platform, or tailored audiences if you're using LinkedIn. So let's just roll through this pretty quickly because we have quite a bit to talk about here. But at the first intro offer, we basically create 4 unique segments. And there are more segments that you can get to, but these are the 4 most basic. So segment number 1 is did not open. Segment number 2, we had an open. Segment number 3, we had a click. And segment number 4, we had our ultimate goal, which is a successful registration. And if I zoom back out, you can see our goal down here in the bottom right-hand corner is registration for the webinar. So, but we know that regardless of the size of the group, e-commerce conversion rates, for example, being in around 1.5% conversion rate is an excellent conversion rate. If you get up to 2, you're well above the average in the industry. So we know that the segment 1, 2, and 3 areas are going to have the largest numbers of all. And what we want to do is understand, especially segments number 2 and segments number 3, what is causing somebody to open that email but not act? What is causing someone to open the email and act but then not register? Because obviously we've made some sort of a positive impact on that person. They're interested in something, but we haven't followed up and they haven't gone through the entire process. So when we create those 2 segments or those 3 segments, we then go to the next step in the email chain, which would be the secondary email send. Now, in between this, we'll also resend to unopens within, say, a 24 to 48 hour period. And that's going to allow us just to maximize people that may have missed it quite often. And this happens to me a lot at work. You see something, you're interested in it, somebody walks into your office or starts talking to you, and it just goes into the dustbin of your inbox.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been opened once. It no longer stands out in your inbox. You forget about it.
Yeah, exactly.
You get the follow-up email that the webinar happened and you missed it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So then what we do is we move down to the second email, and we'd send this, pace it out depending, like typically, for example, with a webinar, 7 to 9 days is a good starting point. Anything further than that, people tend to not plan as often as they used to in, say, a couple of years ago.
Yeah, the two-week mark is really the sweet spot for any sort of event promotions, whether it's a live event or a webinar or, you know, anything really, any sort of event like that you're pushing people to. Because, you know, I think you can, you know, reflect on your own life and how busy you are in professionally and personally. And, you know, people don't really, you know, plan out that far in advance, especially for this kind of an event.
Yeah, and
so.
that far
Exactly.
in advance, I find people say they're going to go, but then just don't go because something pops up.
Yeah, you might be tempted to try and like sell it out and book it up ASAP, but then you might also be looking at a higher attrition rate for sure. Yeah.
Exactly. So when you get down to the segments 2 and 3, the second and third email sends, what we try to do is we prepare for, well, when we're developing a brand persona, we identify the persona's pain points through that process. So what are the things that are causing pain points, and how does the product cause a solution? So in the case of webinars, for example, one of the common ones, especially at the larger business level, it's integrations with a CRM. So I need to be able to hold a webinar, segment that information, get it to sales, and give them the actionable information so they can begin to follow up. That's a pain point because integrations are difficult, they're complex, they can be frustrating, all these things. And what we do is, using your first intro offer, the key here down at points 2 and point 3 is do not simply duplicate the same message again and again and again.
Yeah. Consider that this is also a learning process as well to see why are these people not registering? Is it the fact that it's the time of day that you've chosen? Is it the particular topic? Is it too general to the audience you're offering it to? Things like that. Also, even the speaker who you have and their name and company recognition because also have an impact on it as well. There's multiple factors, and it's really you discovering, like, why is it that they either clicked through, like, what is it that appealed to them to get them to register, and what was the roadblock that if they clicked through, went to the registration page, did they see, like, oh, I have a meeting at that time that day, so I'm not going to bother. You know, there could be many different reasons why they didn't do it.
Yep.
So, yeah, and it's a great learning thing as well, and you use these kind of flows so that you can look at them and improve. A lot of times with automations, people build them, they set them, and then they forget about them. But they're very much something that you build out so that you can improve and add on to it and develop it out as you go. I don't think anyone would kind of create an incredibly advanced automation out the gate. Like, just get a basic structure in place and then build from there.
Yeah, get the structure going.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, in terms of like one of the key things Justin's going to bring to today's live stream is talking about design and design elements and how those interact with everything. And we talk a lot about marketing messaging, you know, the words that we use, which are obviously incredibly important, but visual design and the design that goes into these communications is incredibly important. And there's a term called conversion-centered design as well, which is really driven by the reaction or the action that you get from your leads based on that visual design, which sometimes may not be the design that you might prefer.
Yeah.
As it stands.
It's more strategic. It's more like looking at the colors and that kind of stuff that will bring those people and choose that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
For sure. And I feel like people, when you're developing these email messages, consider, you know, your conversion rates, and that a lot of people tend to structure their emails in the same kind of format where it's like the logo at the top and then you like segue into your information. But consider that, like, for instance, on mobile, if your audience is heavily mobile, when they open up that email, and if you're giving up like half of your above the fold page just to the logo, then perhaps, you know, consider creating a mobile variant and things like that. Like these segmentations that we have here are based on behavior, but you could also have segments, I guess you took it down, but they're also based on things like experience, like are they using mobile or desktop, and how would that render? So
and mobile is typically over 60% of all of our interactions. People are on the go, so definitely design for mobile first. When you get down again to points 2 and 3 here, when we're using a unique pain point and solution, we're really actually stacking the conversation for the S2, the opens and the clicks audience, the people that have interacted. So this particular funnel, which is quite simple, we would actually break out the S2 and S3 with a different message than for people that did not open. And that will help kind of continue, so creating that narrative that moves people through this funnel, whether they did or they didn't. And so you're kind of consistently rebuilding the story, especially, again, someone that opens has read your message, they just haven't acted on it. So you have another opportunity to kind of make the stronger case to see if you can get something in there. So just moving through this funnel, and as you can see, there's another kind of important part about this funnel here on the right-hand side. I'll get better with annotations in the future, but being able to draw things on the screen. But when you get to the registration portion, the fourth segment here, this very important group of highly engaged people that you've got, and that could be a purchase, it's obviously important, or it could also be interacting with a lead magnet, because those are leads now that you then have to convert, right? So obviously they registered, they get a thank you, this event will happen on this date, or here is your download, or here is your discount, or
our very popular tactic is to include the actual calendar invite in that thank you email, so they can add it directly to their Google Calendar or whichever calendar they're using, because as we all know how difficult it is to keep track of things in their schedule sometimes. So that's a great little function that people use.
Make it as easy as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. And then once they're in the funnel, nurturing is incredibly important, these bottom 3 elements here. This one is just illustrating 3 nurtures. So in the case of a webinar, for example, one of the important things to keep in mind is that you would have additional reasons for attendees to come to the webinar. So it might be snapshots of the PowerPoint deck that's going to be discussed, the top 3 reasons why you should. What are the core takeaways? And one of the things in webinar programs that's incredibly important is the simple fact that with webinars, you have got to provide people, you get about a 60% registration to attendance rate. One of the most important things in developing an effective webinar program is giving tactical takeaways for people that attend the webinar. Don't be vague.
Do not be, and information is great. That's awesome, giving them a bit of background and context, because you do have a variety of, different levels of education and things like that. People who may know exactly what you're talking about, and others who are just kind of curious in the topic. So give them some context for sure, but very much give them next steps. Like, why did they attend this webinar? What do you want them to do now? For sure.
And when you're designing your webinar specifically, and this really does go for any marketing, is there's got to be kind of a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. right?
Yeah.
I attend this, and maybe I'll get a very in-depth template or guide that I can actually use in my job. The other thing that you want to be able to do in that nurtures, again, really reinforcing the reasoning behind it. Now, behind that registration. So, for example, let's use an e-commerce product. If I interacted with a lead magnet and I was getting 21 days to a healthier lifestyle, right? So that's a series that would be fed out every day for 21 days. The question then becomes, how are you nurturing that person through? You're going to send them the series, right? But check in with them. Create a narrative that allows you to check in. How is it going today? Are you feeling good about this?
Yeah.
Right? Get that feedback from people, because it's an incredibly important part at this stage of the game to ensure that your attendees in the webinar case or your leads in the lead magnet case are continuing to interact, and it's not just a registration dump and walk away.
Yeah, to that point, it's really just make sure that the webinar, your strategy, is one piece of a larger picture. If your end goal is just to kind of run these webinars, perhaps monthly or bi-monthly, however often, and you get all these great leads from it, and then you just kind of say, great webinar, let's move on to the next one, and kind of start. It should be a funnel, like a tactic you're using, like Dan is saying, to nurture people and push them farther along.
Yeah.
So yeah, don't just kind of be like, great, we had 200 registrations, they attended, perfect.
Yes.
Like, what else? How are they going to convert?
Yeah.
Like, how are you going to nurture them from there?
Yeah.
Are they going to make a purchase from you inevitably? So.
Yep. So in that nurture side, that incredibly important part, as we get down here to the bottom of the promotional funnel, as it were, these segment 2 and segment 3 opens and click audiences will increase obviously every single time that you send a communication. And what we do with those segments are two things. Number one, as you can see here, and this is very important in the world of the webinar, for example, but in the last year, on-demand webinars have pretty much eclipsed the popularity of live webinars for a bunch of reasons. One is that webinars have become more popular, and they've kind of been a bedrock of digital marketing in terms of B2B, informational sales, engaging with audiences, especially when they're in close to the purchase point. But the thing is that with so many webinars happening at 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock, it can be very difficult to gain attendees. You may actually have quite a few people that want to attend, but simply can't do it from a scheduling perspective.
Yeah. So just for those of you who don't know, a live webinar would be run live in the moment and would not be available. You have to attend right then and there. But an on-demand webinar is similarly, it's typically recorded and played, yes, at a specific time, but then available to all attendees. In the typical kind of, you'll get an email, where people used to send the slide deck and things like that. You can now receive the actual recording, which is very helpful, especially if you are creating a webinar that's very tactical, right? Because it could then be a resource for someone to go back to.
Yeah,
100%.
absolutely. And then from the on-demand, always having that webinar available for them to consume. And then the last part about the opens and the click audiences, again, huge opportunity there to keep your webinar content, keep it snackable. 1 hour webinars are great when you have a very engaged audience that is at some decision-making point. But a 1 hour webinar will often drop off in terms of the viewership and the engagement fairly quickly, and you may have golden gems at 45 minutes and 55 minutes. Typically, near the end of the webinars when the summaries come up. Try crafting your webinar strategy in 20-minute chunks, if possible, and then you can stitch those together into a larger narrative. So make it pre-snackable, as it were.
For sure. That's also great strategies for repurposing in general. Because obviously if you're putting, time and effort into producing a webinar, which, if you're plotting it, if you're actually shooting it yourself and things like that, it can be a fair amount of production. So you're taking that file and you can imagine that, yes, you can have, a webinar library perhaps, but you could also export those 20-minute snippets and have them be like a social media playlist, perhaps like a video playlist on Facebook. So just consider your video assets, which is what a webinar is, and that they could be repurposed in many ways as well. So
Yeah, absolutely. So the last part about this, I'll flip back, is we have these audiences now of opens and clicks. We have people that have registered, and that's fantastic. We can reach out to them after the fact. But even prior to or shortly after the event, what we can do, and this would be a strong recommendation for anybody that's in digital marketing, whether you're at another agency or whether you're at a startup or an enterprise, is export these groups of your opens and your clicks across all three of these. You should, if you have a decently sized list, you should have enough people that have done this. You can go to LinkedIn, you can go to Facebook, and obviously you can go to Google AdWords. Create a remarketing audience, and just as an example, on one program that we're working right now, these individuals are going into a tailored audience on LinkedIn. One, to get additional calls to action before and immediately after for the on-demand asset. So don't leave them just because they didn't show up or just because they didn't register for it does not necessarily mean you can infer that they weren't interested.
Or that their information isn't valuable as well. You know, they're technically still, they're qualified enough that they click through even though they did not register. And like Dan's saying, they could be used as an asset to create custom audiences and lookalike audiences as well, so that you can find other people who are equally qualified.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And then the last portion of it, for both people that attended your webinar and people that were supposed to attend but didn't make it, is LinkedIn in-mail campaigns, which are extremely annoying if done improperly.
I've been discussing this in the office. In mail, do you hate it or do you love it?
Well, that would be an interesting series of comments. However, used properly, in-mail can actually show that you cared about whether that person attended that event. Did they get anything out of it? It's a personal one-to-one touch. Certainly not advocating sending to our segment 1 up here, the did not opens. We definitely want to, we don't want to just reach out to people that didn't express any interest. It really is for the smaller portions of the funnel, for the people that did interact, and really helping to complete that narrative. And I think from a webinar perspective and just from a funnel perspective, the reason we develop these funnels is because, as an example, when you go to a car lot and you're going to buy a car, you could ask that salesperson if there's ever a point in that conversation where they didn't know what they were going to say next. And the answer 100% of the time will be absolutely not. I know the next step to try to get that person to purchase that vehicle. This is the exact same thing. We're mapping out the exact narrative, covering as many bases as possible. So there's never a point, and it's incredible how often we would see this, and we do see this, is an email campaign goes out with very little thought to what's supposed to happen after. What happens if someone acts on it? Have we got the series of communications after that fact? Yeah. Right?
Yeah, it's a very common sales tactic for anyone who's like directly in sales and things like that. And I actually used to have to do it at a previous job, in that you actually list out all potential questions that could be asked and all potential pain points, basically roadblocks, reasons to say no, and what your response would be, so that yes, off the cuff you are just rhyming these out to people, and you know, to speak to different types of people as well. Like, I think if you've know anything about sales, everyone knows there are different sales personalities and things like that, and different people need different types of reassurances, you know, in order to be able to make that commitment. So it's definitely part of kind of, if you are doing a campaign like this, that should be kind of in the strategic communication development portion of it before you get into the kind of nitty gritty of actually creating it. It's part of your communication strategy.
Absolutely. Sure. Okay, well, I think that kind of does a wrap on the webinar funnel side of things. So if you've got any questions, just throw them into the comments. I do not have the rest of our
agenda. We have
agenda in front of me.
So we're still talking about what's working this week. Another thing that specifically we've been discussing with some local companies this week, but also just kind of a real ongoing thing that Justin and I, specifically on the content creation side, do very often, is the blend of your traditional and digital resources in your marketing. So very often, although you know we are predominantly a digital agency, we still do you know, all sorts of traditional marketing and sales assets and things like that as well.
Traditional's not entirely dead yet.
It's done. As Dan said a couple episodes ago, it's really like digital marketing is kind of almost a misnomer now. It's like, it's all marketing. Yeah. Digital and traditional are linked intrinsically. They are not two separate beasts. Most agencies are, if you know they were traditional, have added digital elements and things like that. So very much just marketing in general. And that's part of what what we do is that we help people blend. So sometimes we'll have companies that are in more traditional industries and things like that come to us, typically in the B2B space, and they will say, like, we have amazing assets and we go to conferences and, you know, we have this great team built up internally, but their digital presence is, you know, basically a website or potentially a LinkedIn group kind of a thing. So they're aware they should be doing it. I think in this day and age, most business owners know that, you know, you can't afford to ignore your digital presence. But it's a learning curve. You know, when you're a business owner and you know your core like service, you don't know what SEO is really per se, or the depth of it, or how it could impact your actual ROI and your business structure. So that's kind of where we come in. And Justin and all of the team, really, but Justin and I usually start out by going through the litany of assets that they typically have, a heap of PDFs, and we go through and do content repurposing. Where would this be ideal to put onto your site or on your social media channels? Where could we flesh this out and use the great traditional like strategies and assets you already have, but to build up your digital presence so that they work together intrinsically?
Yeah, and I think one of the important things, and we'll kick it over to Justin shortly too, is just to keep in mind that development of brand guidelines, as simple or as complex as they may be, you know, given the notion of omni-channel. So when you're promoting something for your business, you have just a great deal more touch points that you need to be consistent in and customized for. And so, you know, no brochures and print is not dead. That's like not even near to the truth. But the difference is now is that these things blend and cross over, and there's the lines are not clearly defined as they used to be.
And a very typical example of this would be perhaps, you know, Justin develops a magazine graphic for someone, an ad that they're running, and it leads to a landing page that's part of a digital campaign. And perhaps that physical ad is just one of the many ad placements we have that's directing towards that. So it's very much combined.
And when it comes to brand guidelines for stuff like that, you want to make sure that it all looks really consistent, because if you go to something else and it looks like something completely different, then you're gonna be like, is this even the same company? Is this even like the same kind of thing I've been looking at from the ad in the magazine? So you want things to be as consistent as possible. So that's when we make digital and print brand guidelines and color codes and stuff, so that everything does stay as consistent as possible, so that people can pay more attention to it.
Yeah, for sure. And Justin will develop it down to like what color you use when you have a button or a call to action, like down to that kind of a granular detail. And it allows to build that kind of brand recognition, like Justin's saying. Like those huge companies don't have, you know, everyone in the world recognizing their logo at a second because they don't have brand, like incredibly specific brand guidelines. That's the kind of recognition everyone wants with your ads specifically as well. And yes, like to the ad you perhaps read in the magazine, to the landing page you go to the email you then receive, it should all look very much professionally branded from that company.
Yeah, like it should look as consistent as possible, because if you go to that Facebook, you go to that Twitter, and they look completely different, you're noticing that they don't pay attention to their customers as much as you want them to, and it makes a huge difference in the customer experience to be like, do they even care? Like you want to show that you care, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and the most unfortunate thing is when we come across like a company's created a Facebook page because they're like, I need to be on Facebook, but they haven't put the same amount of effort into it than they would their other traditional assets and things like that. So you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot in that it's like they go to your website, perhaps it's gorgeous, perhaps you have a gorgeous sales brochure, but then your Facebook page is like lonely and forgotten with an oddly cropped cover photo.
And you really want to, like, quite often these social media channels, as traditional as the organization may be, Facebook, Twitter, are the front lines. I mean, in many ways they can act even as customer service in quite a few cases.
People still they still go straight to the Facebook page or Twitter. Like they why don't they have a Facebook?
Yeah.
People always question that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that it's there and it looks clean and it looks as consistent as possible.
Yeah, and that you care. As Gary Vaynerchuk would say, probably with an expletive, is that you give a, you know, and people know that, and it's a very real, true point. Is people are savvy, and this is where the omni-channel kind of conversation comes in. So when we do brand guidelines as well, we don't just stop at color sets, and we use calls to action, terminologies. How should we talk about the brand? what shouldn't we say, and that flows into a challenge response guide.
Yeah, and use case scenarios as well, what we would call them. So for instance, like here are, the fonts and the color palette you would use, but how would that be used in an email? Like how would that be used in a print ad? How would that be used in a Facebook share graphic even, down to the last little detail like that.
Yep.
And when you have a multitude of people, for instance, there's about 15 of us creating pieces of content for one particular client at Honeypot, you want to make sure that everybody's following those same outlines, like down to, that the border pixel is 5 or some things like that. It can get very, very granular.
I'm very OCD about stuff like that.
Yeah, and then Justin will come over and give you his frown.
Okay.
Yeah, the Justin look. But yeah, so very important, and just something like it's pretty much a conversation we have weekly, but also seen to great success in that a lot of people have a really great traditional structure, and it just needs to be brought into the digital space.
Yeah,
So
it just need some TLC.
It does. It has to be thoughtful. So if I were to just jump back to this funnel here, if you were to count down here, there's actually 11 total touch points for communication. So what that means is you have to put a lot of thought into every single one of those messages, and it's actually quite a bit more. One of the things we'll often hear clients say is they were unaware, didn't realize actually how many details go into what looks to be a pretty common kind of event. But yeah, so we've got 11 emails, 11 headers, 11 messages, 11 calls to action, none of which we try to duplicate. Obviously, that just becomes repetitive. So there we go. Cool.
Awesome. Yeah, and last but not least on our what's working list is we just wanted to touch a bit on design trends as we kind of move into month 3 of 2018. Justin and as the team have been really hard at work just kind of revamping our creative. Obviously, stale creative is kind of the first very obvious kind of an uh-oh that people realize when you're running ads and just your brand presence in general. So you do have to make sure that you aren't just, especially for advertising, ad creative especially, you are not just running the same ads each month and month after month, things like that. Because it will create ad fatigue, which is very common. But also just from a branding perspective, like you don't want your brand to look outdated. You want to, appear that you are, like you said, that you care and that you are trying and that you are, putting an effort in, and this website has just been static for 2 years kind of a thing. But yeah, there's been some interesting things Justin's been testing out.
So there's a couple new design trends that we have not tested out yet, but are kind of going into the pipeline of 2018, which are some holographic foil kind of looks. So it's kind of goes to that kind of pretty much what Instagram did with that kind of gradient that was all those different colors. It looks almost like adding a little more detail to it and making it look more like foil, which makes a huge difference. It adds a bit more detail to what was so minimalist before. So it's like kind of like what you're kind of gonna see in these trends, are everything's going from minimalist to a bit more texture and a bit more depth to it. Like when the next kind of trend is going into kind of like an arts and crafts kind of style. So it's grabbing like maybe a simple kind of minimalist bird and maybe making it look like it's pretty much sewed on. And those are full of vectors that they're like making as like pretty much look like they're fully embroidered onto the designs, which looks amazing. And it shows a bit more like we said, that you care, that things are actually more tactile, which is a kind of a work off of material design, which material design wants everything to look like it's there living like inside there. And so when you make something look embroidered, it looks like it's living right there, and you feel a bit better towards it because it seems like it's the real world that's like there.
But it's very like tactile. There's a lot of like textures people are fleshing out. They're trying to make it look, things went very, I'd say like 10 years ago it was like effect crazy. Everything was all about effects and things like that. And then people went the other way, and a couple of years ago it was all about flat iconography and the flat, simplistic, minimalistic style. And now people are just kind of just upgrading that slightly, to go with like still minimalistic and like clean and everything, but adding textures to it, like Justin's saying. Like instead of, for example, one that they've used is like having a little bird, but it looks like it's made out of paper, as opposed, or you have an object that looks three-dimensional in the way that you've structured it.
So skewing towards vector illustrations, simplicity with a bit of depth to them. One of the big design trends that is also coming back a little bit, which is interesting, but there's a thing called skeuomorphism. I think I'm saying that right because it's a bit of a word. If you remember, back Steve Jobs was a huge fan of skeuomorphism, which was when you had iBooks on your iPhone or whatever, there was an actual bookcase. So the notepad looked like a notepad, even though it was on a computer or a tablet or a phone. That's skeuomorphism, and it kind of went crazy. There was a huge design backlash against it, and then everything went completely minimal.
Yep.
Right, for quite a long time. And then, to your point, Justin, about material design, which is Google's a fairly massive brand and interaction redesign for every Google product in the world. It's skeuomorphism is now finding its way back in a little bit more subtly.
Yeah, because they're finding a lot of psychology behind it, that people respond better to when it's something that they see in their home every day, or it's something that they see physically in their life, so that they'll respond better to it. So there's a lot of kind of psychology behind why they're making it, and it's nice because these people that had these really minimalist designs before and very flat have the basics to do that, because they'll maybe they had this flat bird like we were saying, and then all they're doing is adding those kind of sew marks to make it look like it's fully embroidered onto something.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just adding that sense of realism, really. And it kind of started, like Justin and I were saying, we remember like when someone took like a great like micro shot of like a wood gradient background and like put it on as like their background image, and it's like a really up close picture of like the detailed grain of the wood, and everyone just loved that, and it's used like to death.
Yeah, which is going into like the kind of the next trend, which is called like natural luxury, which is like pretty much getting a macro camera and going it onto whatever natural texture that you can. It can be like fish scales. It can be, which is really in right now is marble, which I think is getting a bit overkill now. But like what's really in now is marble and stuff, which is grabbing that like natural texture and getting a good macro camera and pretty much using it as a pattern instead of making like this flat handmade pattern. And then which goes into like the new kind of minimalism style, which almost looks like neon signs. If you kind of look at it, it's like a lot of line work, and it looks like almost like it's like made out of a neon sign.
It reminds me of like simple like doodles, like sketches, like not detailed sketches, but like the little kind of simplistic doodles that people would do like in their notepads and stuff.
Like
it's
that
very
one
much
line
like
deck that you would make when you were like in grade school.
Yeah. If you've ever done the exercise where you draw an image without taking the pen off the paper, that's what it reminds me of.
Yeah.
But
those are definitely the trends that are coming in this year. So that's kind of
and staying in touch with that just helps to give you ideas, because you could be working with the same kind of color palette and fonts and things like that for years, and this just allows you to kind of open your eyes to what else is possible and how you can infuse that into your brand. And just so that you're on top of these trends, and not so that your brand, you're updating it and it looks completely different every year, but more so things like, if you add part of these realism elements, for instance, there's certain apps that can add things like ripples to water and like sunlight and things like that, which are very popular on Instagram. And motion graphics like that will increase your conversion rate and your click-through rate on your images. So
cinemagraphs. Yeah,
cinemagraphs example as well. That's be very popular all the time. That's an image that if you've ever seen a video that's been stilled in certain sections, so there's only one part of motion.
It's just the hair moving.
Perhaps, it's a cinemagraph, also very popular. And these design trends aren't just like so your design looks great, they also help with your actual conversion rates and things like that too.
Yeah, engagement. So I think part of the takeaway here is you've got a brand maybe that's solidified. Don't be afraid to evolve it for the channel that you're on, and use some of these techniques that Justin is talking about to differentiate your brand for the specific channel that you're talking about. So, if you've got a trade show brochure and folder, invest a bit in the quality of that folder with some of the textures or holographic foils. Right?
And that's a really easy little thing to add that just elevates it and gives it that little more edge that like maybe that person beside you doesn't have, right? Yeah. And that's what will make people remember you. Yeah.
And there really is. I mean, you see a lot of beautiful photography, for example, on Instagram. I was actually reading a great Medium article that I'll post up from strictly a web UX designer, and is it making a great point that all websites now look the same. And it's actually true there are some pretty solid design patterns that are very consistent across the vast majority of sites.
The aerographic slider.
Right.
Parallax everything.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Flipping jQuery tiles and all that fun stuff. But I think the important thing to take away from that is that especially if you talk about Instagram or Snapchat or Twitter or Facebook, Quora, LinkedIn, your brand as a stock, right? As the images that you take and the logos that you use and how you present it will not present very well using your standard brand guidelines that may work for print, for example. You could be really leaving a lot on the table there and missing out of a lot of engagement by having enough flexibility in your brand and design guidelines to really, so for Instagram, for example, and I see this just on my own feed, you see a lot of beautiful photography that really all looks exactly the same, right? Shallow depth of field for my food product or plate, it looks great, and natural sun, it looks good. But again, it starts to become a bit of white noise, where you're getting get a lot of likes, but are you getting a lot of engagement on that?
Yeah.
Right.
Which one kind of tip I would say for like print versus digital is print, when you're designing for it, you have to really think of something that's more timeless, because when you are printing something that's going to last probably a bit longer. So if it's something that's a bit outdated, people are just going to kind of throw it out. Where if it's designed more timelessly, maybe more simplistic, it's better. Where digital, you can be a bit more adventurous because you can change it in that split second if it's not working, right? So you can be more a bit adventurous with your digital, but keep the print a bit more timeless, a bit more clean, because that will last longer and be better for that you're handing it out.
People do hold on to prints.
For sure. And like a quarterly magazine, for example, not all print happens, at a high frequency, like a daily newspaper. There are many different like industry specific print magazines, things like that, publishers that are very great because they're the targeting of them, because they're industry specific, but they are probably not releasing them every month. They're probably annual or quarterly or things like that. So definitely.
Absolutely. So now, do you guys want to go through the landing page, or what are we going to do?
There's a round table. We were going to do
we're going
to do a what's new. I know we kind of went long with what's working this week, but everything's working. That's not a bad thing. I'm just kidding.
It's awesome when everything we touch turns to gold. Bam.
Oh my.
Holographic foil.
There we go.
Everything Justin touches.
It's now all holographic.
All right, so we're on to what's new.
Yeah, so what's new this week? Obviously, we've got our ears open and we're listening for all those many changes that happen, so we can let you guys know what you should be looking out for. One thing we were talking about was Reddit. A lot of people, Adweek and others, have been talking about the new Reddit rollout this week. Reddit's kind of brought attention to the fact that its mobile apps are now the most popular way for people to access Reddit. It's no longer desktop, which should not be a surprise to any marketer at all. But yeah, they've also rolled out native ads to it then, so that you can actually natively advertise on the Reddit apps themselves. So instead of just running your desktop, we've ran many different ad campaigns and things like that through Reddit before. Now there's kind of a new placement for you, basically, is what they're rolling out. And considering that I assume Reddit's like divide of mobile versus desktop traffic is very, very high. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, there used to be, so I'm a pretty heavy Reddit user just personally. So there used to be a mobile app called Blue Alien, and that's what you would use. It was actually a third-party app that was developed by an independent developer, and that's all that existed to get into Reddit. They did that. And then Reddit, about a year ago, just a little bit over a year ago, released the first versions of the Reddit app, and it was actually, if you've been to Reddit lately, it has its design. It's an older design, and it's also heavily customizable by subredditors. But the mobile app has really accelerated very quickly in the last year. The point to which I find myself also using it a lot more, just for convenience sake, because it's with you whenever you want, right? So yeah, I think there's a bunch of reasons why. I think the thing with Reddit is double-edged sword. If you're a brand, be careful on Reddit. It is not the channel. It's not like AdWords
Yeah.
or
No.
anything else.
Yeah,
Got some
it-
Channel of
pitfalls.
trolls.
It's not like AdWords and other things like that. Like AdWords, I believe there's a place for every company on AdWords, and that could work as a channel for anybody in any industry. Reddit is definitely not that. We're not. It's a great new opportunity and definitely something you should consider. Like, should I be advertising on Reddit? And if you already are advertising on it, then it's just kind of a natural step to add the mobile placement. But not every company should be using Reddit. Reddit is like known as the epitome of the trolls in marketing, and having, first, no offense, like obviously, no, we don't mean it in a bad way. It's just that Reddit has developed such a genuine community, which is a great thing to Reddit's to Reddit's favor.
Yep.
In that they give their users full license to report people who are not using it genuinely, like who are not, if you're just, it can't be used like other advertising platforms are with like a direct hard sale.
Yeah.
It needs to be used with its own kind of custom strategy. And like I said, industry specific.
Yeah.
Definitely only a place like someone's very natural. Like if you're a publisher or if you're in the gaming space, it's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah.
But if you are looking at testing Reddit, consider very closely kind of the strategy you're using. It's really more of a community builder than anything.
Yeah.
If you're looking to run like an e-commerce like sales ad on Reddit, I would say no.
No,
Yeah,
e-commerce would not work.
Yeah, it really depends on what it is, and I think a couple of key things to keep in mind about Reddit are, one, you have to engage with a Redditor. So Redditors are people that run subreddits, and they are completely independent of Reddit, the organization. They don't have to do. That's one of the interesting things about Reddit is their community guidelines are quite often in the hands. There are obviously terms of service, but the Reddit, how a subreddit is used is up to the admins and the subredditors that exist. Therefore, if you're trying to run a native ad campaign on a specific type of subreddit that gets a lot of attention, Animals Being Bros, as an example, is a very popular subreddit. Right? Okay. And
When
it's a
known to
great
dance personal interests.
That's right.
Animals being bros.
Animals being, it's like, when a puppy and a kitten have their arms around her and each other and stuff like that, animated gets. But I have seen actual advertising on that specific subreddit for cat food and dog food and different types of animal products. Now, the thing is if you're Whiskas, you can't just take your 300 by 250 and slap it up there and hope it's going to do well. You've got to turn it into a meme, talk to the community, be part of that community in order for that to even be allowed to be displayed, because the subredditor has the ability to say, no, I don't want it here. And they definitely don't want it to look like
An ad.
a commodity.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't want their subreddit. They take very strong ownership. They don't want their subreddit to look like CNN, for example, that has display advertising wherever, right?
For sure.
And if you're in, Courtney used the example of the gaming space, so Twitch and Mixer are very strong, obviously, on Reddit. They use their subreddits. So if you're on there and you're a brand or you're a community, it takes effort to build a subreddit of value that provides people on Reddit with something they cannot get anywhere else, right? That's what Twitch does, as an example. They get a monthly update from Twitch that has pre-release notes that Twitch does not put anywhere else. So that's one way. So you can't really just push something out onto Reddit and expect it to be successful. You've got to be community oriented. You've got to use the language that community uses. Quite often it means using memes or making fun of yourself or having a completely different tone.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, use Reddit authentically, or don't try it at all. Like if you don't have the honestly, if you don't have the resources to invest in developing it as a channel, then just don't, because it'll probably just if you're just going in tomorrow, creating a brand page and then launching an ad, and like you have no presence on Reddit whatsoever, no connections with any moderators or anything, you're wasting your money, pretty much, in my opinion. But from a strategic perspective, yes, don't put an outright sale on there, but content marketing and content adjacent marketing is something that I would definitely recommend as a strategy. So like if you're advertising against a particular subreddit, and you have perhaps a top performing article on your blog that is directly to do with that topic, then use that as your ad with a lead capture element in the blog post, so that you have more of a kind of an indirect advertising campaign. But
And don't be like, the last point on Reddit before we move on is people will tell you their mind. on Reddit, and they will be very blunt and sometimes very detailed about what their opinion is.
That's a good way to word it.
Yes. And one of the keys to successfully engaging on Reddit is to have the dialogue and have the conversation. Be open, be honest. You can't really use canned responses. That just infuriates people.
Yeah.
So yeah, tread carefully with Reddit, but if you're gonna do it, just understand that it takes work to be successful as a brand on Reddit. It's just not a place that you cannot shamelessly self-promote. You will get caught, and you will get what's called shadow banned. And you
won't even realize it.
And you won't even realize it.
Because it's shadow banned.
That's very true. So anyway, some
shadiest of
tips,
banning.
but some really great opportunities. I've seen some really great advertising done really well that is completely unique to Reddit. And if you've got a product, a brand, or a service, then you can differentiate yourself and make yourself appeal to the Reddit community, it's a huge opportunity because it is a massive website. It's massive amounts of traffic, massive amounts of engagement. You just have to tread carefully.
Yeah, and after all these warnings, to be clear, we have seen Reddit be used for
Very
successfully. Yeah,
yeah.
extremely successfully. So just consider, just don't barrel ahead is all we're saying. Is just stop and think before you just jump onto Reddit.
Or you can email Courtney at honeypotmarketing.com.
There you go. You can
Free
chat
Reddit
about
tips.
it.
There you go.
I've been trolled on Reddit. It's happened.
I won't retell a story about a League of Legends historical post that Courtney did not write, but she edited.
I may have had a Reddit or subreddit started about me. That's fine, or whatever it was, that thing. Yeah, it's a long story. We'll go into it later. Live at the Hive after hours.
Yeah. That might happen on Courtney's personal Facebook Live later tonight, but she's not allowed to call it live.
Our viewers are now on Reddit searching Courtney
Yeah, there you go.
Honeypot.
There you go.
It won't come up.
League of Legends.
Anyway.
So next up is the, so this is actually a really interesting one. So a bit of the thought policing, but conspiracy theories on YouTube. There's a really interesting article that I saw a couple of weeks ago that was actually done by a data scientist that found that the number of conspiracy videos on YouTube is in fact actually astounding. And what happens is, because of YouTube's related video algorithm, once you get into it's called a negative impact loop. So once you see a conspiracy video, the related videos in the algorithm want to show you more conspiracy theory videos.
Yeah.
And your suggestions will then become that. You may start to stumble across it for whatever reason, and you hit it, and then all of a sudden, so what happens is the theory here is that the algorithm is actually negatively reinforcing your thought patterns to reinforce what is in fact, fake news or unsubstantiated conspiracy theories.
Yeah, I can
Right.
attest to this. Because as
The Illuminati are here.
I think they're funny. So I watch them where it's like Hillary Clinton's a lizard, and I think
You know what?
watch
It's true.
them.
I think it's something. I think it's 9% of the population in the United States believe that there are the lizard people. We will talk about it another time.
But
Another day.
going through that, and then you watch one, and then it's pretty much everywhere on your suggested. And then I can
We've
see,
all been lost in
yeah.
a sea of YouTube weird
Yeah.
videos
And
before.
I can see how people that aren't watching it for comedy can be so influenced by that hole that it takes you down.
Yeah. Now the interesting thing about this kind of negative feedback loop that has been created also incites creators. So I'm going to pull this article, but literally millions of dollars are being made consistently on conspiracy theory videos that brands were not aware that their advertising was pre-rolling, mid-rolling, or running on this.
On Clinton is a lizard, and it's
Yeah.
like some
Or Pizzagate, or
high-level
any
brand.
one of these crazy things. And what
The Greys.
so then what that does is it incents the creators to create, and to be honest with you, I think there are some legitimate people that are investigative, YouTubers for real. Like they actually go through that process.
Yeah.
There are a whole lot of creators on YouTube that are there. They don't care how they're going to make some AdSense money, and that's their goal, is to make money and revenue on AdSense. So if I know how to appeal to the algorithm because of conspiracy theories, and I know how to create a good hook, and I can get into the related videos queue because of my YouTube optimization, I can make a lot of money for fairly simple content that I don't have to substantiate. So this is what this whole data scientist article was about, is in fact the millions of dollars, and in a sense it's almost irresponsible how YouTube is one, reinforcing negativity on the user, and two, because necessarily, like if I were to say to you, you have two options. You can go to the gym or have a donut. Give your gym pass or donut. Yeah, and it's like 99% of the time someone's going to take the donut, right? So you know it's not good for you, but you'll probably bite. And that's what they're doing with this type of content, is you may not believe in it necessarily, but when you begin to click on it, the algorithm is saying, that shows that Justin is interested in, so I better show him more conspiracy theory, which then reinforces your potential
to think that Hillary Clinton's a lizard.
Yes. Now, the interesting thing is that the creators are doing this for revenue, and YouTube has to stop it. So, one of the solutions that they've come up with, and they've got a long way to go, I think, in terms of how.
This is just a small update kind of this week that is one of probably many you can expect to see in this whole fake news clampdown across the board, whether it's Facebook, YouTube. They're all obviously trying to vet and bring more of the higher quality content to the forefront. But yes, this week, like to the point of this survey is that they've come out with these cues that come up when you're watching a conspiracy video that are linked to Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's
to debunk.
Just to debunk these things and to try to provide a secondary source in a type of, just to bring some credibility and some citation and things like that, so that people left to their own device, they could watch these videos and start believing it. Perhaps they watch them initially because they've stumbled upon it, but to Dan's point, like you keep reinforcing that, and you're actually, you're starting to mess with like the psyche of these people.
Yeah, you
right?
are, and it's been shown that when you get into these negative feedback loops, it happens on Twitter, it'll happen on Facebook. If you algorithmically go seek these things out, and you go find, very political left or right wing content, and the algorithm delivers more of that back to you. If someone is leaning in that direction, they are then constantly reinforced by that same message, which then reinforces possible, like it may not have happened before.
It's like when you're having a conversation when you're complaining about someone and with someone else, and the other person adds in, and then the two of you are just getting so into it. It's like you're just feeding off of each other.
that is, yeah.
It's kind of the normal, like, everyday equivalent of it, yeah.
So from a content creation and just perspective on YouTube in terms of what's new, like they're trying to walk a line between censorship, which they are doing. I mean, it's kind of hard to say that you've got a private business that is used as a platform for content creators around the world to talk about politics or talk about opinions and talk about whatever it is that you want. And it's a real test of things like free speech and censorship, and how do you manage that, and what does that even mean? And how do you correct incorrect information or outright lies? So this Wikipedia linking is one way to citation and corroborate and provide a secondary opinion.
Which Wikipedia itself is kind of like a free of speech, because anyone can go in and anyone can add their own input to it. So it kind of is like going against like community versus community, kind of debunking itself. Yeah.
And I think just the importance is what you just said, is showing alternate opinions. If you're going to research a topic and try to become educated about a particular topic, whether it's a conspiracy theory or whatever it may be, you shouldn't just look into one perspective, right? You should, like, people do that, it's quite, you can't just see, this is what I think and I'm just going to go for it. Look at the whole picture and then make your decision. I think that's very much what they're trying to do.
Yeah. Yep.
They're not trying to say, like, don't believe in this conspiracy theory. Just consider all the options and get a real well-rounded, like, proper view of the situation.
Yep.
So, yeah. And you got to consider these aren't, like, these could be, like, children watching these videos too, right? Like, it's not like it's, an everyday adult. Like, it could be a 12-year-old watching this conspiracy video and not knowing any better, right?
Now.
Yeah.
For sure. All right, so moving right along, since we're almost at 1 hour right now.
We are. Yeah. Should we just had the one other, we could segue right into our roundtable if you want.
Sure, let's do a couple of minutes on roundtable.
Cool, awesome. So, yeah, we were talking about what, we're going to do something a little different for our roundtable today. Justin and I were just kind of talking about our landing pages, and we've talked about landing pages many times on the show because they are a staple of all marketing. They're a very important asset. And mainly a lot of what Justin does at Honeypot is helping us develop our landing pages so that they not only include these design trends that we already mentioned, but also so that they convert. Because yes, we want things to look pretty, which Justin will get asked many times, make this look pretty, but we are here to be marketers to see an ROI from it as well. So it's a blend of both sides. So we're just going to walk you through one of our top performing landing pages that we've used for a campaign for a few years. It's been through a few renditions. Excuse me, but it's a good example because it has a lot of the key elements of a landing page that can create high conversion.
Yeah, so like really good practices. So if you're looking at the landing page, you can see that I already have CTAs above the fold. So, and that's really high up because God only knows how small the person's screen is. So I want to make sure that that pixel measurement is above the fold for everybody, and has the proper info and straightforward info for anybody. Now, with someone with a bigger screen, now you see right underneath a piece of the video, which will intrigue people because we know that video at this point is one of the highest converting pieces of content.
Yes, the play button on a video is one of the highest converting visuals. Like that play button, the little white triangle, is actually one of the highest converting assets online in terms of click-through rates. So having a video on your page that's recent, that just to give a bit of background, this is an event page for a networking event locally, and very common campaign structure that people would use for an event. You have an event, whether it's online or physical, and you want to drive attendance to it. So how do you do that? We advertise on several different platforms. It's a very community-based thing because it's a networking event. So we do advertise on Instagram and Facebook and things like that, and also organically through email. But this is the landing page that everyone gets directed to from those many channels. There's also some print elements in there too. But yeah, so walking through this, we actually, in the first year launching this program, it increased their physical attendance at events by 25%, and it also grew their social media channels as well, and the conversion rates on them. So very much a practical outcome to this page. It's great that it's an RSVP, but there's also a couple other details in it as we walk you through that you'll notice.
Yep, so if we keep scrolling through, one thing else you'll notice is there's CTAs everywhere. I make sure that you are able to sign up, you are able to get into that event everywhere.